Hello, everybody. My name is Bruce Montgomery, and this is my colleague, Tracy Priest.
Hello, everyone.
And we're with The Road to Retail. On our podcast, Tracy and I hope to offer insights and ideas for how emerging small and challenger CPG, consumer packaged goods, brands can establish and grow their business.
Bruce and I have been working in CPG commercial operations for over 30 years, working on brands of all sizes. By commercial operations, we mean all aspects involved in establishing and growing brands across channels and platforms. On our show, we bring on guests that are brand founders, leaders, investors, as well as all kinds of suppliers to these emerging brands that are subject matter experts to share their unique insights with the audience.
To keep up with the show, please follow the Road to Retail podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Leave us a review and consider sharing the show with a friend or colleague that may benefit from the content. You can also check out our website at www.road2retail.com and follow The Road to Retail on LinkedIn. Let's get to today's episode. Looking to scale or launch your supplement or skincare brand? Eagle Labs Incorporated, based in Florida, offers full-service NSF-certified contract manufacturing of capsules, tablets, powders, liquids, gummies, and lotions. All of their manufacturing takes place in the USA. From R&D and formulation to packaging and fulfillment, Eagle Labs provides scalable, high-quality production that meets FDA and NSF standards. To learn more, contact Michael Law, Chief Commercial Officer at Eagle Labs at michael.law@eaglelabsinc.com.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of Road to Retail. Bruce, my friend, good to see you.
Tracy, always good to see you and always good to be joined by fantastic guests, and we have another one here today.
Absolutely. So please tell our audience who we have today.
Today we're joined by Jeff Lovering, who is the Chief Data Scientist at Customer Marketing Group. So as the conversation goes on, folks, you might hear us refer to CMG, but Customer Marketing Group is Jeff's organization. And Jeff's going to tell you what they do here in a second. But Jeff, thanks for joining us today and taking the time. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Looking forward to it.
Great. So Jeff, before we get into discussion on pricing and the other things CMG does, give the folks a little background on your career history and how you landed at CMG, and then maybe take a little bit of time at the end there to talk about what CMG does and how it helps, small emerging challenger brands grow their business.
Yeah, absolutely. I wish I had a really interesting story, but my background is essentially, I'm entering my 23rd year at CMG in consumer packaged goods, CPG. I was studying to be a quant on Wall Street in grad school, and I needed a summer job. And I found this company based in Houston at the time that was working on consumer packaged goods, doing pricing and trade promotion work. And I'm like, wow, this is really interesting. And so I interned for a summer and decided, you know what, this is what I want to do. So I went to my graduate professors my last semester and said, hey, look, I know what I want to do the rest of my life. I want to solve really interesting problems that has a combination of economics and business and psychology and all the stuff that goes into it. And since then, I've been solving problems for hundreds of brands, dozens of companies, and working in analytics, in negotiation, in selling, and I've just enjoyed the entire time.
That's awesome.
Fantastic. Well, Jeff, if you get bored, there might be an opening at the Fed one of these days soon, and you can apply all that quant that you were studying for.
Right.
Well, thank you so much.
BLS data.
Yeah. All right. Well, Tracy, take us into the discussion, please.
Absolutely. For our great small emerging brand audience today, first of all, tell us, Jeff, what does a brand just have to get right in regards to pricing, starting out?
It's the number one thing is do not go out too low. And when I say don't go out too low, I mean two different things. One is too low on a list price. I see a lot of times emerging brands will say, if I can just get, more volume, I can go at a lower price, get more sales, and I'll get a price break later and my margin will take off. That's usually not the case. And then they forget to account for all the fees and all the cost of actually growing a brand and being at retail. And so they compress their margins and then it screws up I mean, it's a cascade of problems down the road if they go out to a list price too low. And then the other price too low is that they think they can capture market share or get more sales if they price at retail really low. And that actually also becomes a problem, because if you start out and you shoot all your arrows on your first shot, you have nothing left in the quiver later. If something's not going right, how do you fix it? So I always tell brands, go too high, you can always fix it later. You can buy down, but if you go out too low, trying to raise price later is so hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, hey, Jeff, can you clear up something? There's a lot of chatter out in the marketplace when you hear other people speak about price pack architecture. Can you just kind of demystify that incredibly sexy term and tell people what it actually means?
So essentially, price pack architecture is a value hierarchy. And essentially what it means is you have different price pack or packs, right? So you can think of a single can soda, a 6-pack, a 12-pack, a bottle, a 2-liter bottle, and you can have different packs for different consumer needs, different usage occasions, or different channels. So the classic example is always having a club pack, right? So the price pack architecture says, I'm going to price those on some kind of value curve that says that I'm going to give more value as I move down my packs. So the typical example is an immediate consumption soda has the absolute highest price. And then as you move down the curve, you get to the club pack or the value pack, which is more product for a lower retail price.
Okay.
And boy, did that cause problems when I said you price too low. If you get your first product wrong, then that one of those cascading problems is your price pack architecture gets completely out of whack down the road if you decide to launch like a club pack or multi-packs.
Right. So folks, a couple of things Jeff's already said is when setting price, if you're going to risk something and you haven't hired a group like Jeff's, risk being too high rather than too low. They both come with some problems. If you're in brick and mortar retail, trying to take a price increase can be a huge battle. If you do lower your price, you have to do something that's called protecting floor stock, which is kind of, and if you manage your inventory, you can minimize that to an extent. But the key takeaway is, as Jeff said, if you're not 100% confident and you're kind of taking a bit of a guess, go too high rather than too low.
Absolutely.
So Jeff, you've already touched on a little bit of this. So let's say that I have a successful DTC brand, maybe I'm on Amazon a little bit or something, and I've got enough traction that I'm going for it and going for brick and mortar distribution. And let's say I've done the right thing. I've picked a retailer that plays to my regional strength if I have one, and the demographic profile of the shopper is a match for my brand. How should a brand go about trying to negotiate price with the retailer? Just like you said, there's the list price, what they're acquiring it for, and then the retail that the consumer sees. What counsel could you offer there?
So that's an interesting one, and I'm going to go against the grain, kind of your typical CPG lifer, lifetime CPG person. I'm going to say, don't lead with price. I love price. I spend my entire career researching it, working in it, on and off work hours. This is my pride and joy. But when you go into a retailer, price should be one of the last things you talk about. I always say go in and you lead with a story, you lead with your reason for being, where you fit in the category. And prices, this is where it gets controversial sometimes, is I don't like giving the retailer a suggested retail price known as an SRP. I don't like putting it on price lists. I like just having a list price. And here's why I recommend that. If you're going to a retailer and you sell them on the story, your reason for being, why you deserve to be on shelf, and it comes to a price discussion. If you're at your example, by that point, they should have a good idea how to do some unit economics and get to a retail price. And they probably assumed a retail margin. So if you go in and you give a list price, and then you say, in our SRP, our suggested retail price is $5.99, and you assume the 30% margin, and the retailer says, hey, that's great, I'd love to be at $5.99. Well, oh, by the way, my margin is $45. Guess what you've just done? You've just boxed yourself into spending money to buy down that $5.99. So what I always recommend is negotiate on the same side of the table. And what I mean by that is, hey, Mr. Retailer, Mr. Buyer, where do you see us sitting? If they say, no, give me a SRP, right? Because they've been trained in negotiations a lot of times. You say, well, I could see us sitting in the $5.99 to $6.99 range. I'm not as locked in on trying to get to that one SRP because I want to be able to support the category. What are you trying to do for the? And so by doing that, you let them give you the margin. It lands where it lands. If it's not a price point you like, you can always buy it down later. If they really press you, what I like to do is give something else, right? Say yes, and can I run an extra promotion? And the reason being is trying to buy down price for every single unit that goes to the cash register is super expensive. Mm-hmm. And if you're new to the retailer and you want to drive trial and awareness, having just an everyday low price is not going to do it. You want yellow tags. You want that promotional tag. You may want to display it. And so saving those pennies to run promotions is going to be better for the category and it's going to be better for the buyer. And if you can sell on that, it's much easier than just going in and boxing yourself into a price on shelf.
So Jeff, just to quantify that, would you recommend then if you're pressed for an MSRP to give the buyer a range, like you said, like somewhere between $5.99 and $6.99, and then ask the buyer the question, which we always really recommend on this show to make sure that your meeting is a dialogue, not a monologue, and then talk about what their margin and what their goal is for their category. Am I understanding that right?
Absolutely.
So Jeff, one other thing I'd like to try and go a step deeper here. I hear what you're saying. That's very logical and definitely against the grain, which is one of the reasons I really like it. If a brand is entering a category that's kind of defined, so Tracy and I like using gluten-free chocolate chip cookies. So you're bringing your cookie to a market that already exists. Cookies exist, chocolate chips exist, gluten-free chocolate chips exist. So there's kind of a corral of the brands that are in this category. How do you counsel someone who says, Jeff, we think we should be the premium price in this category? How do you either counsel them harshly, like, dude, you're crazy, or kind of give them some backyard psychology of say, tell me why you think you should be there? Because we hear all the time, I'm going to be a premium price. Really? How are you different? So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. So interesting. I've done that multiple times. I've actually helped launch brands that came in as super premium to the category. And so it comes down how you position it with the buyers, right? And who gets in. One thing, if you go in super premium, just know you're limiting your consumer base. So your total addressable market is automatically shrunk if you go in at the highest price. Higher priced products and super premium and premium products also typically turn slower. So to generate the same amount of profit and retail dollars per linear inch on the shelf, that means that typically the retailer is going to take a little bit more margin. And so already there, you're adding some different margin. So I say, look, that's fine. We can do that. And there's plenty of arguments you can give to the buyer. So if they really are set on going premium, is know they're going to have lower velocities, know they're going to give higher margins, and know that they're going to have to spend a lot of time justifying why they need to be on shelf. Now, it is possible in certain retailers. For emerging brands, what I would typically say is you have to make sure that you are typically premium. You can't just go in and say you're premium because you want to be. But brands have done that, and some have been successful, right? I can't say there's one way of doing everything. If there was, we'd all be running the same playbook, but of course we're not. I typically go in with what's called anchor pricing. You go in and you tell the buyer, hey, we want to anchor the category high. What that does is that gives relief for all the brands lower to raise price, right? And so you can tell the buyer, say, hey, look, we want to be super premium. So in my example earlier, we were talking about a brand at $5.99. Let's say I want to go in now and be at $8.49. That's $1 higher than everyone else. And you can tell the buyer now, hey, that private label you might want to take up now because we've anchored high and we're raising the category. Now that works for some retailers. It doesn't work for all. So that's when I go back to you're limiting your total addressable market because now you've even limited out some of the retailers you can go to.
Great. Thanks for that added color. Tracy?
Yep. So talk to our audience a little bit about there's a lot of misunderstanding, I think, among small emerging brands about the difference between a direct price list and a distributor price list. So tell us the difference and why you really need a brand needs to have both.
Okay, so we're going to get very controversial here. I'm going to give you some hot takes that you can use. A distributor price is when you have to go through a distributor, say a Unify or KE, and you give them one price. And then if you're going to a retailer that you're direct, so you ship directly in or they pick up directly, you're say you're going into a Publix or you're going into a HEB or something, but you're selling directly into the warehouse, you give them a direct price. Most people historically have given a lower price to the distributor than they have for the direct price.
Right.
And there's some reason for that, right? Because if you want to managing price across channels, and channels are a lot of times defined by route to market, then that makes sense. However, the amount of going through a distributor, there are so many variables, right? Different retailers have different costs from the distributor. There's different freight costs. There's different retailer margins. And to really manage price through the distributor network is super difficult. Not impossible, but difficult. They try and do that to give a lower price to the distributor. And then they give a higher price to direct to make sure they can manage price kind of on par between direct and distributor route to market. I actually recommend doing the reverse. I recommend having a much higher price to the distributor than I do to the direct retailer. And whoa, why would you do that? Well, there's three reasons why. The first one I've already said, it's super difficult to manage retail price through a distributor network, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is going through distributors is super expensive. I mean, how often do we get the notification that says, oh, by the way, this distributor is adding a new fee that you get to pay for. By the way, here's some deductions. So the cost of doing business through a distributor is typically much higher than going direct, just because of everything that gets added on top. And the third reason is you typically get, because of the cost of doing business, it's actually better sometimes to go direct, and especially if you're in the MULO channel where you can go direct. So you can go direct to a Kroger on the East Coast, or you can go to Publix or HEB like I talked about. For those, you have to give them an incentive to switch. If you've done your price list where you've given a lower price to the distributor and direct, then what's their incentive to switch? Where if you flip it and you have a higher distributor price and a lower direct price, now you have a really good incentive to go for the retailer to go direct, because you can say, I can actually offer you a much lower price.
Hey, Jeff,
So
1 second. Could you
take
just
on
tell
direct
people, sorry, Tracy, Jeff, could you just tell people what you meant by MULO channel?
So MULO channel would be non-natural. So it'd be your mass, basically your mass, your grocery, your drug channel.
Great. Thank you.
So I want to dive a little deeper on this, on the distributor, because that's a world that I've spent a lot of time on. So you mentioned this, that retailers have different markups from the distributor. So there's a very large natural channel retailer that starts with W that has a much lower markup from the distributor than your mom and pop natural store down the street. So talk a little bit about, I mean, is that why you say it's difficult to manage? Because it's all over the board, is my understanding.
It is all over the board. It depends on what the distributor is doing, right? So there's what's called full service, right? So it's not just, they're not dropping off product. They're actually supposed to be going and doing more into the store. So for the large retailers, like one that say it starts with a W, you can manage price directly with them. And that's not as difficult, right? That's almost like being direct in terms of having the conversation, assuming you can, one, get the time of day from the buyer, which as a small emerging brand is sometimes difficult. Buyers get tons of emails. There's also pricing departments involved. The bigger natural retailers have pricing departments that are, doing stuff. And so it's super difficult to manage just that lower markup. And then once you get into the mom and pops, right, I've seen as high as, 35, 40%, and if they're buying book price or catalog price, right, so it's just the highest price, it can be 50% or more. And so for those, one, it's super hard to get the time of day, right? It's super hard to influence them, and to build it into your financial model that says, oh, we want to make sure that they're at a certain price is super. Not only is it time consuming, but the bang for your buck. So if you think about your time and we're getting 50 cents lower at a mom and pop shop is probably not going to drive enough value that you would at a direct retailer where you can go in and move it 50 cents and they have 1,000 stores, 1,100 stores.
Yeah. Great insight. Great insight. Bruce?
So Jeff, we touched on this a tiny bit before here. So how should a brand establish its price by channel and size? And you talked about that a little bit about price pack architecture, and that was a great example. So a couple of kind of follow-up things for you to consider as you put this answer together. Talk about also the risks of one-offs and talk about the risks of, not necessarily thinking through the order and sequence, if you believe it's true, of the retailers you go to. Because we have stories of a New England-based brand. They get all excited. They met a buyer from Fry's. They get into Arizona stores. No one's heard of them. And it's like, why did you do that? And it's like, well, they gave me a meeting. Well, that's their job to have meetings. How'd that work out? Well, it was terrible. So, a little bit more, please, on, pricing by channel and size, and then all these one-offs. We've had instances, in your example earlier about pricing, where these people are so psyched that their brand is growing, they look up one day and they have 7 different pricing deals and they have no control over anything.
Yeah, that's man. One thing I want to make sure is what I'm recommending always is not necessarily a should, right? It's a possibility. And the reason being, and this is why I love working with emerging brands, is the founders and can come in and they're disruptors. And so sometimes they try something that's never been tried before, right? So I want to make sure that the listeners understand, I'm not saying this is the playbook. Like you have to do it this way. Now, is it going to minimize your risk of failure? Probably, right? But, high risk, high reward sometimes. So when it comes to, first of all, one-offs, I am all about, especially for emerging brands, because for a whole host of reasons, I'll name one of them, minimizing complexity. Yes. Because for emerging brands, the best salesperson in the organization, bar none, is typically the founder. And so I want the founder to be able to go to meetings, to sell it in, because it's their baby. This is their baby. This is their story. And no one tells it better than the founder. And so by doing a bunch of one-offs and doing, this retailer wants a special pack. This one wants, instead of a 12-ounce, they want a 10-ounce so it fits in their set. All this stuff, they will generate. Sometimes, we talked about distributor versus list price. Sometimes they'll give a different list price to a bunch of different retailers just to get the business, to get that invoice. And it creates all this complexity. And this complexity is time consuming. So I'm a big fan of simplifying. Most products are going to sit in a specified set, or maybe 2 sets. And so there are predefined sizes or size ranges, right? Plus or minus a few percentages. It might be a 12-ounce category. You can come in at a 10 if you're super premium, or you might want to do value and go up to a 14. But there's typical ranges. And then there's also pack sizes, right? Like there's very few brands that will come out and be like, I'm doing a 7-pack, right? Like who does a 7-pack? And so what I typically recommend, and Bruce, this goes back to your original question, which is when it comes to like your channel packs, how you're going to do your price pack architecture, have an idea of where you want to go, right? If you're a super premium, product that's retailing at 50% higher than the next closest national competitor, you're probably not going to Dollar General, right? Probably going to Walmart pretty late in the game, if ever. But hey, Costco might be on the cards, right? Like, so for those, kind of map out, and it's really hard because they're so worried about that first step. Like, what's that? My next invoice, my next retailer, and they're not thinking long term. I spend a lot of my time working with brands that kind of hit that next evolution, and they've got to go back and fix everything before, and that they've done, too many list prices, too many pack sizes, and it's time consuming, and it's very difficult once something's entrenched to create change. And so for that reason, hey, look, start at a certain size, and we talked about the value hierarchy. Hey, if you're coming out with a single, but eventually you'll do a multi-pack, raise that price a little bit, right? No kind of, hey, in Costco and Sam's and BJ's, that club channel, this category typically plays in a 12 count, right? So kind of map out what that looks like. And then as you expand, Bruce, you said it, man, I am all about you starting your market. In your story, I wish it was the first time I've heard it, but when people say, yeah, I'm shipping basically, popcorn as an example, or chips from East Coast to the West Coast, like you're shipping air across the country. And for your first retailer, that's super expensive. You can't walk the market. Like start close to home, start close to your co-man, and then work out from there.
Jeff,
So Jeff, go ahead, Tracy.
two things I love that you said. One is minimize complexity. That's a golden nugget for small emerging brands. And the second thing is, if you make a mistake or you go down a path, it's hard to unwind things. So love both those. Sorry, Bruce, go ahead.
So Jeff, one other thing, if you wouldn't mind talking about it a bit, share with the folks the potential risk of going to an EDLP account, whether it's an HEB or a Walmart, as like your first swing, because we've heard from many brands. It's like, gosh, it was so great. I got into 600 Walmart stores. They expanded me to 1,000. Then I tried to get into XYZ account, and those buyers say, why'd you go to Walmart? I compete with them and I can't make any money at this price. So if you believe there's a downside of going EDLP first, please share that. And if you don't think that's so, why not?
So there are and I'm not going to get into there's only a few instances where I've actually supported going into an EDLP account, but it's not for the emerging brand typically. For the emerging brand, I really like going with smaller retailers to figure out who your consumer is, how you respond to price, how you respond to promotion. You also have the ability to try different vehicles. And what I mean by different vehicles is you can test running a multiple, like a buy two, get a dollar off, or a BOGO, or get that yellow tag to generate some trial and awareness at shelf. Because typically when you're emerging a brand, you have limited funds. And those limited funds have to be split between all your types of marketing. Your consumer marketing, your shopper marketing, and your trade marketing. And if you believe that trade marketing is, and that's your promotions at shelf is what I mean by trade marketing, that price promotion and stuff. If you believe that that's going to grow your brand and, lead you to be a unicorn, you're going to be greatly disappointed. Promotions alone can't grow a brand, right? Price promotions can't. They can help, but they can't do it alone. And so if you go to an EDLP customer to start, you've just wiped out you've wiped out a big tool that you can use, price promotions, to drive some trial and awareness at shelf, to support the shopper marketing, support the consumer marketing. And the second thing is, like you said, it sets a floor. And if you go into a Walmart, or I've seen try and get into a Dollar General, and you set that floor, you've now created an anchor that everyone else is going to look to and be like, well, I want to be within that price. And so this is where I say, look, if they're going in too low to start, it's low list price, it's low retail price. You've now started a cascading impact further down the road that's going to minimize your options to price and promote later.
Yeah.
Well, that's so true. All right, so Jeff, let's talk about one of the other big challenges of pricing. How can an emerging brand or a challenger brand, work to ensure that their salespeople or broker network actually gets the correct pricing into the market? And you've shared some of that. And then second, how do you successfully implement a price increase? I mean, we've all heard stories of, oh, XYZ they're not accepting price increases. Yeah, but funny how my shelf price has gone up 7 cents and I got none of it. So how do you have those discussions aside from, and we've all done it and it takes some courage. I mean, there are retailers we've all had to just stop shipping to when they don't take price increases. And that turns into a bit of a game of chicken, depending upon who the retailer is.
That is true. Getting the price you want on shelf, I'll address that one first because it's a little bit easier. The answer is it's hard. You can't always get the price that you want, and sometimes you have to live with it. And so the question becomes, if you want to be at $5.99 and you're out there at $6.19, unless you know that there's a huge volume drop off at $5.99, sometimes it's not worth going in and buying down price, right? It's emerging brands. Buying data is so freaking expensive. So I lean on brokers and your network, right? Like, ask for people, hey, I live in Austin, and people have messaged me all the time. Hey, can you go into Whole Foods, or can you go into HEB and take pictures for me? Absolutely, man. If you're in the industry, I always joke, our phones, I've got more pictures of shelf sets than I do my kids. Sure, I'm not the only one that has that. So we I mean, the CPG industry is big, but it's small. And what I mean is, like, we help each other. So ask somebody, hey, can you just go and look in this market and take some pictures for me? Do that all the time. And then you have to decide whether or not you buy it down or not. Selling in price increases, I counted it up the other day. I've done 34 pricing analysis in the last couple of years by brand pack types, right? I've had 2 where a retailer has rejected them and just said, nope, we're not doing it, right? Now, that's not supposed to be indicative of how the market is right now. I've had some where certain large retailers have been like, okay, next. So it depends on how you position it. And so this is what I always recommend when selling in a price increase. You don't go in and say tariffs, right? And mail in a letter and think you're done.
Yeah.
And that's going to get people upset. I recommend going in and showing that you've done the due diligence, that you've turned over every stone. You go in and say, hey, here's what the labor costs have done. Here's what my tolling costs have done. Here's my ingredient costs. Here's my transportation costs. And you just keep going in. Here's how much I've invested with you. Here's how my sales are doing, right? All this different stuff. And you have this nice, pretty one pager or a few pages. If you don't have the data yourself, there's publicly available information. You can use a producer price index. There's always information about transportation. If you import, you can get the average cost of containers. There's stuff you can do to support this price increase. And then going back to my negotiation style, it's all about sitting on the same side of the table and trying to solve the same problem. You're trying to create value for your consumer that you share. You're trying to grow the category. You're trying to drive retail dollars and retail margin. So you're trying to do all this. And so solve the problem for them. Don't just mail it in and say, hey, I'm taking a 10% price increase. You go in and say, hey, here's the reason I am taking a price increase, and here's what I'm going to do about it. And the do about it is, hey, we expect that your price is going to go from $5.99 to $6.49. We're going to price protect, or we're going to keep that promotion that we had planned already at $3. We're going to keep that. And then from there, we're going to float up. And we estimate, and it can be a rough estimate on how you think that's going to impact your retail dollars. And then you say, and we're going to watch this. If it goes poorly, we're going to self-correct, right? Because we're co-investing in this category. So it's not like we're going to set it and forget it. We're going to keep evaluating and make sure this is right for both of us. Now, if you're lucky, further down the road, the buyer rotates and you add price increase works well. If it doesn't, and that's when you have to have the hard discussion and figure out what to do next. And sometimes that does require bringing in some outside help to figure out, what the problem is and how to solve it. And it's not always price.
Thanks, Jeff. So Jeff, one kind of follow-up point here. So as more brands are bought by financial sponsors or private equity groups, one of the playbooks they like to run is they'll look at, Bruce and Tracy's awesome gluten-free chocolate chip cookie. They'll have some analysts run what they call a pricing study, and they'll say, we can take price up 40 cents. Our math says that there's no drop off in unit volume. And then they wonder why this is not as easy. So I know you guys have crossed lots of bridges with these types of firms. How do you counsel the almost solely financially oriented brand that hasn't really sat in the chairs and understand the industry? Do you tell them, guys, your pricing analysis is done by an 8th grader, and this isn't how it works when you walk into Publix? How do you work through that?
We might have to have a follow-up call to go through all the reasons that you can bring. But in short, the first thing is it's typically not about the math, right? The math, yeah, you can take a price increase, and like you said, the 8th grade analysis shows that, hey, look, if I do take this price, I'll make this much more money. The issue is always in the execution, right? Selling it in and the downstream impacts. Most people can see the immediate impacts. It's always the second and third order impacts that they forget, right? How does taking price impact your promotions? So are you also, not only is your base volume going to go down, but now your promotions are going to have to change, right? We know to run a promotion, you need, in best case scenario, 10% discount. Sometimes it's 15 or 20. If you cross a certain price point, you might have to do more than $1, right? I've worked with brands that were at $9.99 and just did $1 off. And then they take the price increase, and that $1 off doesn't give them anything, and they're not even hitting the 10%. And so they have to revamp their entire promotional strategy, and they end up losing more money than they thought they were going to make. So it's all about explaining the downstream impacts. And the other one, and this is especially for brands that have long tails, and what I mean by that is they have a bunch of SKUs, and they may have 10 SKUs, and then the bottom three are just barely hanging on by a thread. When you take price, and this is the most important thing I can tell emerging brands that have multiple SKUs, when you take price, it makes people look. And what I mean by that is they look and say, this SKU's down 20% year over year. You want to take price? Yeah, that one's gone. Going back to what I said about it's not the first order impacts, it's the second and third. One of the second and third order impacts is you lose distribution. So most analysis and the economists and analysts of the world will say, well, it's ceteris paribus, which is Latin for all else being equal. It's not always all else being equal. When you take price, you'll see distribution drop.
Sorry, Jeff. One of the other things when you talk about it's the second and third order issues that people don't think about. One of the things we've seen is people take price, their unit velocities drop, and suddenly they're not hitting their most favored MOQs or minimum order quantities at their contract manufacturer. So now they're taking a hit to their cost structure because they used to get this thing made for $2 and now they fell below that threshold. Now it's $2.25 per unit. And they're like, didn't see that coming.
Oh, and it's cascading, right? Because you're not producing enough for your MOQs. And then your turns through the warehouses, the shipper warehouses are too low. So you get hitting with slow mover fees. And then you get on shelf and you're not moving. And your velocities go down even more. And this becomes this cascading impact where it's all of a sudden this brands go down. So I have seen brands that have taken price too much and it leads to a significant downturn in the business and sometimes ultimately not even surviving.
Yeah. Boy, Jeff, you are the Grim Reaper, aren't you?
Yeah, now all these CPG executives are just becoming TikTok influencers.
Exactly. So Jeff, talk to us about a little bit about the economics and math behind, establishing your first price at retail, things that you really need to make sure you take into consideration.
So I probably should invite you to my college graduate course in which I cover all this. No, seriously, this is not an easy thing to do. So the first thing is knowing your unit economics. And what I mean by that is you have to understand what it costs, your raw materials, your packaging, your labor, your tolling, your waste, your spoilage, your freights. You have to know what that is, right? Yeah. I don't spend a lot of time in that arena. I work with sometimes the finance department work that calculates it, but I typically start with the COGS. And then from there, you have to build on your margins. You have to build on your trade, your trade rates. You have to build on all the other investments that you have that you're going to make, and that gets you to a list price. Now, there's multiple different ways to set your overall list price, and there's three main ways that it's used in the pricing industry. One, I'm going to make a lot of marketing professors mad here. One is value-based pricing. That doesn't work for CPG. We're at low touch. We don't think about product as much as a consumer, right? Because it's a low cost. It's not like a car, right? We spend a lot of time researching cars. We don't spend a lot of time researching a candy bar. So value-based pricing typically doesn't do very well. The other one is market-based pricing, where you basically say, hey, this is the price I want to be at in market. You back into a list price, and then that's your list price. Problem with that typically is you don't take into account your COGS. So when I say understanding your unit economics, what I mean by that, if you have your COGS and you build up, that's called cost plus. Cost plus pricing in most industries is frowned upon. Most pricing professionals recommend you don't do cost plus. In CPG, it actually works, and it works really well if you understand the downstream impacts of where your COGS lead to a list price, and that list price then leads to a retail price. So for the listeners, and I know this is really convoluted, but it is super difficult, is one, unit economics, know your COGS, and know what your target margin and retail margins and trade rates should be.
Good.
Great.
Bruce?
Yep. Thanks, Trace. So Jeff, we're kind of heading toward home plate here, not quite going into our slide, but we're heading toward home plate. So who's had the greatest influence on your career? And if you don't want to name names, that's fine. But what did this person do for Jeff Lovering at some point when you're like, and that's really stuck with you? It's like, man, I didn't know anything about anything. And they invested all this time, whether it's a professor, your mom. Tell us who that person might be or who those people may be. It's often way more than one.
It is. And actually, it's an interesting question. I remember in third grade, I had to write who's your hero? And I wrote, I don't have a hero, I have heroes. right? Because there's certain aspects of people that I really like that I could come across and I'm like, hey, I like what that person does. I like the way they speak. I like the way they solve problems. I like the way they lead. But then on the flip side, I've also been around people where I'm like, ooh, I don't want to treat people that way. I don't like the way they made me feel. So I'm a constant learner. For those of you that know me, I mean, I read voraciously. Like literally, you recommend a book, I will read it. And if it's a really good book, I'll read it in a week, just because I want to learn. And so that's the way I kind of am with people. I want to learn. Now, there's very few people that I've interacted with over my career, 23 years in CPG, and then my schooling, that I haven't been able to take away something, right? I mean, we all leave an imprint on other people. So I don't want to be too general. So if I had to name one person, I mean, the person who instilled that love of learning, and I'll be very cliche here, was my mom. You know, she was always like, well, solve it, figure it out, go read a book, go look it up in an encyclopedia. For those younger ones, those were books where you got information, not chat.
Love it.
So even in third grade, Jeff was not following directions. So the teacher's like, I'm keeping an eye on that love ring boy. All right. Well, that's
Coloring
great.
outside the lines, even at third grade, Jeff. We love it. So our final topic here. So you obviously are passionate about pricing and about what you do. So tell our audience, Simon Sinek, the why behind the what. Tell us a little bit about why you are so passionate and why you love what you do.
Ultimately, I love solving problems. I like the web of information. I like integrating the economics, behavioral economics. I like integrating the psychology, the negotiations. I like helping people and seeing, I mean, people ask me like, well, how come you're not a head of sales? I'm like, oh, no. I want to be the man behind the curtain telling you what to go do and solving your problem so I can go work on the next problem, right? And so why I have had to go to retailers and travel, which I'm not a huge fan of traveling, and why I had to gone into retailers to have the pricing discussion. That's not what I enjoy. What I really enjoy is solving the problem and then communicating that to somebody. So when I talk about second and third and fourth order effects, like I'm literally thinking about that complexity in some cases all the time. Like that's what drives me. And yeah, I learn something new every day. And so to me, I have a bad day if I don't learn something.
Love that.
That's good. That's good. All right. Well, Jeff, this has been great. So tell the folks a little bit about how they can reach out to you or learn more about CMG. What's the best way to get in touch with you guys?
The easiest way for the listeners would just be to go on LinkedIn and type in Jeff Lovering, Jeff, and then Lovering, Lovering. I'm the only one in Texas, and I'm the only one involved in CPG, so I should be pretty easy to find. And then from there, I can put you in touch with, either my colleagues or we can have a chat.
Great, great. Well, Jeff, thanks again for your time. Okay, Tracy, the big finish.
Absolutely, Jeff. This was awesome. And I know our audience is just going to love this episode. So, audience, thanks for joining us today. Continue to follow us on our Spotify, Apple, LinkedIn pages. We do post every Tuesday. So look for this episode. And we thank you so much for joining us. And Jeff, you were, again, very awesome. And also, we have a website, www.road2retail, and you can check out our episodes there as well as some other content. So thanks again, Jeff. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. My
Good
pleasure.
luck out there, folks.